Isn't it strange how the universe works? You think you've been waiting, planning, guarding your heart, believing that connection will arrive when it's convenient. But life doesn't follow your schedule. It doesn't knock politely or ask for permission. Sometimes the person who's meant to reach you will appear out of nowhere, catching you off guard, testing if you're paying attention, if you're ready to notice, if you can handle the chaos of someone who changes everything. Stepping into your world without warning. Timing never asks for permission. It doesn't pause for your plans, your routines, or the little schedules you like to tell yourself control the world. You think you're ready, that you've set everything in order, that when the moment comes, you'll be waiting in exactly the right way. That's the illusion. Timing doesn't care about illusion. It moves when it moves. And it's always earlier or later than you expected. You notice it in small ways at first. The way mornings feel longer, afternoons heavier. The way decisions you thought you had time for suddenly compress into urgency. You ignore it at first because the patterns are subtle. You've been trained to respond to noise, to dramatic signals, to events that demand attention. Timing doesn't shout. It whispers, nudges, tilts reality slightly so that if you're paying attention, you see it. If you're not, you stumble right past, thinking everything is still the same, thinking you've got control. You never do. Not really. The clock ticks, whether you're aware of it or not. Hours fold into each other. Days slip through your fingers. And the moments that matter arrive quietly, with no fanfare, when you are distracted, looking the other way, or busy convincing yourself that nothing important could possibly be happening right now. That's why timing is the cruelest teacher. It doesn't punish you immediately. It lets you linger in comfort. Let you convince yourself you're safe, that you can delay, that you can wait until you feel prepared. But preparation is a mirage. You're never ready for the way life lands, for the way connection appears without warning, for the way someone who matters might step into your world while you're still adjusting to everything else. You felt hints before, subtle signals that something is shifting, that the rhythm of your life isn't quite what it seems. Maybe it's a sudden awareness in your chest, a thought you can't shake, a feeling that someone is closer than you think. You dismiss it. You always do. The world trains you to dismiss uncertainty, to label intuition as coincidence, to reduce chaos into patterns you understand. Timing doesn't play by those rules. It comes anyway. It bends reality just enough so that when the moment arrives, you can't ignore it even if you wanted to. You start noticing the small signs, messages that feel meaningful, coincidences that cut too close to be random, thoughts of someone that appear uninvited but insistently. You rationalize them. You tell yourself you've imagined it, that it's nothing, that it's just another day repeating itself. But the clock is moving, and the universe is arranging itself quietly around moments you won't anticipate until they land. There's a peculiar tension in those moments, a stillness that precedes action, a suspense that feels heavier than the reality itself. You feel it as a pull, a subtle alignment of circumstances that you can't control. You want to be ready, to prepare, to anticipate, but readiness is irrelevant. Timing doesn't wait. It doesn't care about plans or comfort zones. You start replaying scenarios in your head, imagining how you might respond, how you might notice, how you might recognize the significance before it disappears again. But the truth is, those rehearsals don't matter. What matters is presence, the ability to see what is right in front of you, the willingness to acknowledge that something is arriving whether you're prepared or not. Timing doesn't knock. It slides into your awareness when the environment, the people, and the circumstance all align perfectly and quietly in a way that can't be ignored. And you realize, if you miss it, it won't wait. Opportunities don't linger. Moments of true connection don't hesitate. They arrive unannounced, testing your attention, testing your ability to notice, testing whether you've been paying enough attention to the small, subtle patterns of life that whisper truths you've been avoiding. Timing is the invisible hand that moves everything forward, and just because you can't see it, just because it doesn't bend to your schedule, doesn't mean it isn't there, preparing, nudging, aligning, until the moment comes when it will no longer whisper, and you either recognize it or you let it pass, forever altering the path you thought you were walking, forever reminding you that the world has its own plans, its own rhythm, its own way of delivering what matters, when it matters, whether you like it or not. Unexpected arrivals don't come with warning signs. They don't text in advance, leave footprints, or give hints that fit neatly into your calendar. They show up while you're busy living life the way you've always lived it, confident that everything is predictable, comfortable, and under control. You think you know how people enter your world, how connections happen, how relationships unfold. You're wrong. They arrive suddenly, unpredictably, shaking the foundation you've built and testing whether you're paying attention. That unpredictability makes them terrifying, exhilarating, and completely unavoidable. You notice the shift first in small ways. A thought that won't leave your mind, a memory that surfaces at the wrong time, a message that seems ordinary until it isn't. You dismiss it, rationalize it, continue on your routine. That's exactly what makes it effective. Life doesn't break through with alarms. It slips in quietly, unannounced, when your attention is elsewhere. And by the time you realize it, it's already changed everything. You feel it as tension before recognition. Your instincts prick in ways you've learned to ignore, but this time, ignoring them has consequences. You want to maintain normalcy, but normalcy is gone. You try to recreate the comfort you had, the illusion that things are under control, but it doesn't work. Nothing prepares you for the subtle, unrelenting pressure of someone entering your life in the way they were always meant to, testing boundaries, breaking patterns, rewriting routines. You start to notice details you never paid attention to before, the way words land, the timing of messages, the coincidences that feel too pointed to be random. You tell yourself it's coincidence, that you're reading too much into it, that life is just moving as it always does. But you're wrong. This is arrival, real, deliberate, undeniable, and it doesn't wait for your approval. You want signs. They're there, layered in everyday moments, a glance you catch out of the corner of your eye, a laugh that resonates differently, a feeling that tightens your chest without explanation. You suppress it because you've been trained to suppress the unfamiliar, the uncomfortable. But this discomfort is life tapping you on the shoulder, asking whether you're awake enough to notice what matters when it matters. You begin replaying interactions in your head, scrutinizing words, gestures, timing everything. You ask yourself whether it was always there or if you imagined it. That's the trap. You'll never be certain until you accept the moment as it is. Preparation seems impossible because it requires surrender. You can't prepare for what arrives without warning. You can only respond. And responding requires shedding control, letting go of schedules, dismissing plans, abandoning the illusion that you dictate the rules. You feel a pull, a tension, a magnetic force drawing attention to someone who wasn't on your radar, someone who rearranges priority without asking. Your rational mind wants explanations, sequences, steps. It wants predictability. But arrival doesn't negotiate with reason. It operates outside the boundaries you've constructed. You feel your heartbeat in moments where it should be steady, your focus sharpened in the mundane, your thoughts looping back to subtle signals you previously ignored. It's uncomfortable because you're aware of the stakes, aware that you can't rewind time, aware that ignoring it would mean losing something that might not come again. You start questioning your readiness, your openness, your capacity to recognize what matters without tainting it with fear or doubt. Timing doesn't care. The person arrives when the universe deems the alignment perfect, not when your calendar is empty, not when your heart is primed, not when your mind feels prepared. It arrives, testing your attention, your awareness, your ability to notice and respond. Everything you've relied on, habits, routines, predictability, crumbles quietly. Nothing about this arrival is convenient. Nothing about it fits neatly into your plans. That's the point. You realize that life doesn't respect schedules. It doesn't wait for certainty, permission, or readiness. And the longer you hesitate, the more fleeting the chance becomes, because unexpected arrivals are fleeting by nature. They aren't delayed. They aren't repeatable. They appear, and they change everything in ways that are subtle at first, undeniable soon after, and irreversible forever. If ignored, recognizing true connection isn't easy. It doesn't come with signs you can read in a book or formulas you can memorize. It doesn't arrive at the perfect time or in the perfect place. It sneaks in, dressed as coincidence, conversation, or distraction, and it tests whether you're awake enough to notice it. You think you'll recognize it because it will hit you like a thunderclap, but real connection doesn't scream. It whispers. It lingers in the pauses, the glances, the silences, the moments you almost overlook. You walk past it every day, distracted by routines, obligations, doubts, and excuses, convinced that anything that matters will announce itself with clarity. That's the trap. Life isn't that polite. Life doesn't wait for certainty. Life doesn't care whether your attention is perfectly aligned with your expectations. Connection comes when it comes, and it doesn't negotiate. You feel it first in subtle ways. A thought you can't shake. A name that surfaces without reason. A memory of a laugh that felt familiar in a way that unsettles you. You try to rationalize it. You tell yourself it's coincidence, that you're overthinking, that you're projecting meaning onto randomness. But randomness rarely feels this persistent, this pointed, this alive. You can't ignore it forever. It sits quietly at the edge of your awareness, testing your willingness to notice, testing your ability to see what matters before it passes through. Recognizing connection requires patience, but not the kind that waits idly, the kind that observes, that watches, that listens even when distraction beckons. Most people aren't ready for it because they are busy seeking drama, clarity, certainty, proof. Real connection doesn't arrive with guarantees. It arrives with ambiguity, with questions, with discomfort. And that discomfort is a test. Can you sit with it? Can you allow it to exist without needing to define it immediately? Can you tolerate uncertainty long enough to let it reveal itself fully? You replay interactions in your head, analyzing words, timing, gestures. You ask yourself if you missed something or misread a signal. You convince yourself you're imagining it because imagining it feels safer than confronting the possibility that something real is here, waiting for you to acknowledge it. Recognizing connection requires honesty with yourself. You can't lie to your instincts. They notice the small things, the lingering look, the tone that softens, the moments when your chest tightens without explanation. They signal before your mind can rationalize, before your habits intervene. You might feel fear, even when nothing is overtly threatening. Fear is the body noticing stakes it hasn't fully quantified. Connection is dangerous because it demands vulnerability, presence, attention, and choice. Recognizing it means you have to let go of control, step out of comfort, and allow life to operate on its own timeline. You can't force it. You can't manipulate it. You can only pay attention, acknowledge the moments, and respond when they appear. You start to notice the patterns, the coincidences that feel deliberate, the repeated thoughts, the pull that grows stronger each day. You can't escape it. The more you resist, the louder it becomes in your awareness until you have no choice but to confront it. You realize that recognition doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a series of small awakenings, subtle realizations, repeated signals that build into awareness. And awareness requires courage. Courage to admit that something matters, that someone matters, that you've been blind to it. Because attention is hard to sustain, focus is difficult, and life keeps distracting you. You see it not in grand gestures, but in nuance, in timing, in alignment, in resonance that refuses to be ignored. And the longer you delay acknowledgement, the more fleeting it becomes. Because connection once missed rarely returns in the same form. It shifts, evolves, disappears. Recognizing true connection is about noticing the quiet signals, understanding their significance, trusting instincts that have been honed by patterns you've learned to ignore, and acting with presence when the moment demands it. It's about seeing what matters before it slips away, before life moves on, before chance passes and leaves you staring at absence, wondering how you missed the person who was always meant to intersect your path, the signals that were always there, subtle, persistent, waiting for you to finally notice and respond with awareness and honesty. Letting go of control is terrifying because you think the world belongs in your hands. You plan, you arrange, you predict outcomes, and you convince yourself that if everything follows the path you've drawn. You'll be safe, successful, untouchable. But life doesn't ask for permission. Life doesn't need your consent. It arrives anyway, in ways you can't anticipate, with timing that disregards calendars, with people who move independently of your expectations, with consequences that laugh quietly at your sense of order. You notice it first in small disruptions, the tiny shifts that feel inconvenient but familiar, a conversation that doesn't go the way you expected, a message you didn't anticipate, a feeling in your chest that something isn't aligned. You dismiss it because control is comforting. Comfort is familiar. Familiar feels safe. And you've been trained to cling to the illusion of safety. But the illusion is exactly what makes it dangerous. When you let go, even slightly, even for a moment, you confront the chaos you've been managing in neat, quiet compartments. You realize that control was never real. It was a story you told yourself to justify your routines, your delays, your hesitation. Letting go means acknowledging that story isn't truth. Letting go means surrendering to timing, to circumstance, to forces beyond your grasp. And surrender is uncomfortable because it requires honesty. Honest acknowledgement that you've been managing life, not living it. That your confidence has been based on familiarity, not mastery. You've built systems, habits, routines that make it feel like you can handle everything. But the systems only work when nothing unexpected happens. Control is a lie that thrives on predictability. It crumbles quietly when confronted with unpredictability. And unpredictability is the only constant. You convince yourself you're prepared. You rehearse scenarios. You make contingency plans. But contingency plans don't prepare you for reality. They prepare you for your imagination of reality. When life deviates from your imagination, control evaporates, leaving only decision, only action, only awareness. You notice how fragile it all was in retrospect, how much effort you spent maintaining the illusion while ignoring signals that things were shifting outside of your perception. Timing doesn't wait. People don't wait. Life doesn't wait. And letting go of control is the only way to align with it. You feel tension in the release, a pull between fear and curiosity, between resistance and acceptance. The fear is loud. It tells you to cling, to tighten, to manage. Curiosity whispers, nudges, tempts you to observe, to experience, to respond instead of react. But responding requires presence. Presence requires attention. And attention requires relinquishing the belief that you've been steering. The cracks appear gradually, not all at once. A misaligned expectation here, disruption there, small things that make you feel slightly off balance. You rationalize them. You adjust. You compensate. You think you've restored order. But order was never yours to restore. The discomfort grows. You feel it in your chest, in your thoughts, in your inability to predict what comes next. That's when you begin to notice the patterns, the subtle signals that control was never control, that it was structure imposed on chaos, not harmony with it. Letting go is not about giving up. It's about acknowledging limits. It's about seeing the world as it is, not as you hope it to be. It's about trusting timing, trusting circumstance, trusting yourself to respond when necessary instead of pretending you've orchestrated everything. You feel exposed when you release the reins, vulnerable, raw, but you also feel alive in ways that careful management never allowed. Life moves faster than your plans. People change unpredictably and consequences arise without warning. Control was never protection, it was avoidance. And you see that clearly when you stop resisting, when you allow uncertainty to be present, when you respond with honesty instead of structure. You notice signals you've been ignoring, opportunities you've overlooked, people who matter appearing when you weren't expecting. Letting go sharpens awareness. It heightens sensitivity. It requires courage because you realize that every attempt to hold everything in place was costing you. The moments that actually matter, the connections you didn't see, the shifts you could have acted on. And as you release, even partially, even imperfectly, you begin to understand that control was never yours to wield. That timing, connection, life itself moves independently. And the only way to align with it is to surrender to its rhythm, to observe, to notice, to respond, to participate without the illusion of absolute authority, and to feel fully the chaos an order that exists simultaneously, all around you, all at once, waiting for recognition and action without asking for. Permission signs you've been missing are the cruelest trick of life. They're quiet, subtle, almost invisible if you're not paying attention. You think you've been careful, observant, aware, but awareness is a skill most people stop practicing the moment routine feels safe. You walk through days thinking you notice everything, but the signals that matter hide in the pauses, in the silences, in the moments you don't consider worth examining. You dismiss coincidences as chance, coincidences that are anything but. You ignore feelings that prick the chest, thinking they're just anxiety, just imagination, just misinterpretation. But those feelings are the breadcrumbs life leaves for those who can see them. The ones who ignore them often miss the connections that arrive quietly, deliberately. Testing whether you were paying attention when everything else distracted you. You replay your interactions, your routines, your patterns, and realize that the signs were always there. Subtle glances, lingering thoughts, repeated coincidences, the way certain names or images appear just often enough to feel uncanny. These aren't mistakes. These are life trying to nudge you awake before opportunity passes, before connection slips through your fingers, because you were too busy ignoring the tiny signals, the whispers, the slight disruptions that scream softly if you only listen. You tell yourself you'll notice next time, that you'll act when it's clearer, that you'll pay attention when you're ready. That's what everyone tells themselves. And that's why so few catch what's meant for them. Life doesn't pause until you're ready. Timing doesn't wait. The signs that matter will arrive and depart, and your readiness is irrelevant to their schedule. You feel moments of déjà vu, coincidences that feel pointed, thoughts of someone that appear uninvited, but insistently. You rationalize them, call them randomness, ignore them. That's the trap. The more you rationalize, the more subtle the signs become, until they require a decision, a recognition, a response that you can't ignore without consequences. You've been trained to dismiss intuition, to mistrust subtlety, to wait for clarity, to demand proof. But the signs that matter don't provide proof. They provide awareness. They give you a glimpse of alignment, of convergence, of possibility. And noticing them requires honesty, attention, courage. Courage to admit that perhaps you've missed what was always in front of you. Courage to act without certainty. Courage to accept that life doesn't follow your rules. You begin seeing patterns you ignored, timing that's too precise to be coincidence, thoughts that recur at moments that matter, interactions that feel significant even if they appear mundane. You question your perception. Is this real? Am I imagining it? That doubt is exactly what the signs are designed to pierce. They test your attention, your presence, your willingness to see what's true even when it's inconvenient. Ignoring the signs trains you to miss the important moments. Recognizing them trains you to respond with clarity, to act with precision, to notice when timing aligns in ways that demand your awareness. You realize that signs don't arrive for decoration. They arrive with purpose. They arrive to redirect, to warn, to illuminate, to open doors that might otherwise remain closed. Missing them isn't just a failure of perception, it's a choice to remain in comfort, to cling to routines, to dismiss subtlety in favor of noise. And the more you cling, the louder the consequences grow until you can no longer ignore them. But recognition isn't passive. It requires engagement. It requires stripping away distraction, filtering the irrelevant, focusing on what persists, what returns, what tugs insistently at attention without explanation. You notice when a name appears in your thoughts at the wrong time, when a pattern repeats just often enough to feel orchestrated, when intuition pricks despite your efforts to rationalize it away. These are the signs you've been missing. They demand presence, not interpretation. They require response, not delay. They arrive to test whether you're awake, whether you're paying attention, whether you can act when subtlety becomes insistence. And yet, even when you notice, you hesitate. You weigh, you question, you doubt. because missing signs has taught you to mistrust your own perception. That hesitation is the final test. Will you recognize truth when it finally demands acknowledgement? Or will you rationalize, wait, and let opportunities slip past quietly, leaving only the echo of what might have been, the breadcrumbs ignored, the signs you didn't see until it was too late, when life's quiet whispers became consequences too loud to ignore? Readiness of the heart isn't about timing, planning, or external circumstances. It isn't about having everything aligned, every fear conquered, every expectation met. Heart readiness is subtle, invisible, and often uncomfortable. You feel it in the chest, in the tightness of the breath, and the restless thoughts that refuse to settle. It's the awareness that something is arriving, someone is arriving, and you can no longer hide behind distractions, routines, or convenient detachment. You convince yourself you'll be ready when the conditions are perfect, when the signals are unmistakable, and your mind has sorted every possible outcome into neat categories. That's the illusion. Hearts don't wait for permission. Hearts respond to presence, to awareness, to the subtle alignment of circumstances that no planner can predict. You feel it in small ways at first, a thought that lingers too long, a name that surfaces unexpectedly, a memory that carries weight beyond reason. You dismiss these feelings because preparation feels safer than exposure. Control feels safer than surrender. Habit feels safer than truth. But the heart doesn't negotiate. It moves whether you acknowledge it or not. And the more you delay recognition, the more the opportunity slips into a rhythm you can't intercept. You begin noticing patterns you would have ignored under normal circumstances, repeated coincidences, timing that feels uncanny, a sense of presence in absence. You rationalize them as imagination, as randomness, as illusion. That's what people do when they aren't ready. They dilute awareness with convenience. They trade intuition for rationalization, and the heart waits, quietly, patiently, testing whether you can bear to see it, to feel it, to acknowledge it. You replay interactions, analyze signals, question perception. You ask yourself whether you're misreading significance, whether you're projecting meaning, whether you're imagining the alignment that appears too deliberate to be chance. That hesitation is the hallmark of unreadiness. Courage is required to notice without overanalyzing, to feel without controlling, to respond without expectation. Readiness isn't about certainty, it's about attention. It's about being awake enough to recognize when someone or something matters before it passes through your life, before the timing shifts, before the signals fade. You feel the pull in the chest, the tension in the thoughts, the subtle alertness that cannot be ignored. It's uncomfortable because it exposes vulnerability. Vulnerability demands presence, and presence demands honesty with yourself. You cannot prepare for readiness in the conventional sense. You cannot organize your mind into a state of receptivity and guarantee understanding. The heart refuses guarantees. It refuses schedules. It operates in alignment with forces beyond calculation, beyond planning, beyond control. You sense the alignment building, timing, opportunity, subtle cues converging in a pattern you didn't design. Your mind wants clarity, wants explanation, wants certainty. The heart doesn't offer these things. It offers only signals, intuition, awareness, insistence. You feel tension because action is required. But action is frightening. You know that acknowledging readiness changes everything. It removes the safety net of indifference. It demands decision, engagement, confrontation with discomfort. You begin to notice persistence in the patterns, thoughts that return, coincidences that recur, feelings that intensify. Each repetition is a test. Are you awake enough to respond, attentive enough to notice, courageous enough to act? And yet, hesitation persists. You rationalize, delay, doubt, because readiness asks for surrender, and surrender is terrifying. You feel the pressure in subtle ways, moments of attention caught too long, moments of silence weighted with meaning, moments when life seems to conspire toward awareness. These are not accidents. These are alignment. You try to prepare, to calculate, to predict, to organize your feelings and timing into perfect readiness. That effort is wasted. Readiness is never perfect. It cannot be manufactured. It must be experienced, felt, acknowledged. The heart doesn't operate on schedules, it operates on resonance, on presence, on alignment with forces that you cannot control. You recognize that preparation is illusion and attention is reality. Awareness is the doorway. Courage is the key. Timing is indifferent to hesitation. Signals grow persistent until you can no longer ignore them, until inaction is impossible. And in that tension, in that pull between fear and recognition, between doubt and attention, you discover the subtle truth. Readiness of the heart is not about having all the answers. It's about noticing when something matters enough to change everything, enough to demand presence, enough to insist that you see, feel, and respond before the opportunity moves beyond you, before chance passes silently into consequence, before alignment completes itself without your acknowledgement, leaving only regret for the moments you weren't awake enough to answer the call. Embracing uncertainty is a dangerous game because it asks you to walk without guarantees, to move without certainty, to act without assurance that the path is safe. Most people avoid it because comfort is a powerful sedative, a layer that makes the chaos of life tolerable. But uncertainty doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about schedules, plans, or preparation. It appears suddenly, unannounced, demanding attention, forcing decision, revealing truths that you would have preferred to ignore. You feel it first as a tension in the chest, a flutter of thoughts that refuse to settle, a nagging awareness that control is an illusion. You tell yourself you'll wait until it's clearer, until the fog lifts, until you understand the rules. That's what everyone does. That's why life surprises so many people, because clarity rarely arrives before action is required. Uncertainty thrives in that hesitation. It grows in the space between thought and movement, between awareness and response, between expectation and reality. You notice it in the small things first, timing that feels slightly off, coincidence that seem too pointed, feelings that prick the chest for no apparent reason. You rationalize them as mistakes, imagination, overreaction. That's the mind defending comfort, pretending that ignorance is safety, pretending that delay is preparation. But uncertainty doesn't pause. It waits quietly, patiently, and then accelerates when you least expect it, arriving at the moment you've assumed you were ready. At the moment you've relaxed your vigilance, you begin replaying scenarios in your head, trying to map outcomes, trying to predict movements, trying to control chaos that isn't yours to control. That effort is useless. You realize that embracing uncertainty is not about predicting outcomes. It's about noticing signals, about feeling without explanation, about responding in alignment with reality rather than expectation. The tension grows because action now matters. Each decision, each recognition, each acknowledgement carries weight, and the unknown refuses to offer comfort. You feel fear, not the dramatic kind, the scream and run kind, but the subtle, insistent kind that prickles your awareness, that demands presence, that forces honesty. It's uncomfortable because it asks you to relinquish the belief that you've mastered the environment, that you can predict what comes next, that safety is inherent in routine. You notice patterns that defy explanation, thoughts that recur, signals that persist, moments that seem orchestrated by chance yet feel deliberate, as if the universe itself is nudging you to pay attention. You dismiss them initially, convincing yourself you'll act when certainty arrives. That dismissal is exactly what uncertainty tests. It's a trap. By the time clarity seems to appear, the moment has already shifted, and the window closes quietly, almost imperceptibly. You recognize that embracing uncertainty is not about eliminating fear. It's about acting despite it. It's about acknowledging discomfort as a sign of awareness rather than a signal to retreat. You feel tension in your body, a sharpened perception of timing, a heightened sensitivity to interactions that would have gone unnoticed before. You notice subtle cues, glances, tones, repeated coincidences, thoughts that insistently return, reminders that something significant is present even if invisible. Your rational mind protests, demanding explanation, demanding proof, demanding patterns that make sense. The heart, intuition, and awareness demand nothing of the sort. They insist on presence, on attention, on acknowledgement without condition. The longer you hesitate, the more fleeting the alignment becomes. The longer you resist, the louder life becomes in forcing you to notice, in compelling you to act, in demonstrating that uncertainty cannot be negotiated with delay. You start to understand that embracing uncertainty is not about preparation, it is about surrender. Surrender does not mean passivity. It means observing, feeling, and responding in real time. It means noticing when opportunity or connection presents itself without waiting for guarantees. It means acknowledging that timing doesn't wait, that the universe does not pause for your comfort, and that the moment that matters will arrive regardless of your readiness. You recognize that hesitation is the enemy, that fear is the teacher, that attention is the ally. Every repeated thought, every persistent coincidence, every unshakable feeling is a call to action. Ignoring it trains you to miss, to remain in comfort, to allow what could matter most to slip past unnoticed. You feel the subtle pressure building, the awareness of potential shifting, the necessity of response. And in that pressure, in the tension between fear and attention, you discover that embracing uncertainty is not surrender to chaos. It is mastery of presence. It is the courage to notice, to act, to feel, and to respond before the fleeting alignment disappears, leaving only the quiet realization that the world doesn't wait, timing doesn't pause, opportunity doesn't knock twice, and connection does linger for those who hesitate, for those who cling to the illusion of comfort, for those who avoid the unknown, instead of leaning into the unpredictable flow that defines life, love, and everything that matters most.